All right, let's go ahead and take a look at a couple of examples of books that I would purchase. In a previous installment, I looked at $1,200 as the line in the sand, but by your request, we're going to look at a lower dollar amount. And in this video, we're going to look at $400 or less. And I will tell you that every book that I'm going to look at is a solid book. There is no doubt about that, but we're going to look at the book, we're going to look at the grade, we're going to look at the data surrounding that, as well as the rationale. And the very first book we're going to look at is an annual. This one, X-Men Annual Issue number 14. Again, a solid book, no doubt about it. You can see that the script writer for this was Chris Claremont, the legendary writer, and a ton of some really awesome artists. But given that $400 price point, where should we look? The cool thing about this book is that in my mind, this book is underpriced, and we can go to the top. We can look at the 9.8. There are 5,400 copies of this book on the census. There are 1,396 of them that are a 9.8, which represents 25.5% of the universal population that's out there. And let's go ahead and dig into this data. Let's look at what the data is actually telling us. You can see here that the most recent price for this book, $230, again, below that threshold of $400. And if you back up, if you look at where this book has been over the last 90 days, over the last 1 year, it is actually at its lowest point, generally speaking, right now at roughly $230. And you can see that play out when you look at the graph that is on the left side of the screen. Let me blow that up just a little bit. You can see that if you back up from the most recent price of $230 all the way back to, let's say January of 2021, this book was going for $239. Right now, $230. So again, if you remove everything that happened during the pandemic, this is not a bad price for this book. And when you back up, you can see that back in 19, this book was going for $100. Back in 19, I mean, where is it? 100, 103, 107. It jumped up here to 218 in May. I'm not quite sure when that Gambit movie was supposed to come out. People may have to look that up, but again, not a terrible price to pay for this book in any way, shape, or form. And again, the lowest that it's been roughly in the last year. You can see that play out with some of the data here as we look at some individual sales. Now, the question is why? Why am I recommending this book? Part of the reason why I'm recommending this book is, one, I think that this book is undervalued. That is my general opinion about this book. I also do not necessarily agree that this book is the first cameo of Gambit. I do not agree with that. And here's why I say that. Gambit actually appears throughout this issue. Multiple panels, multiple pages, in uniform, and he is recognized by name. In my mind, that is not a cameo. That is a first full appearance. And depending upon where you get your information from, there are some references out there that are starting to recognize that this is the first appearance of Gambit. Now, admittedly, it does not have as great a cover as X-Men issue 266. Great cover there on that one. Gambit is actually on the cover. This one is not that great of a cover. It is also an annual, but again, when you dig into the details, when you actually go page by page in this annual, what you will see is Gambit repeatedly shown in uniform and also named. This, in my mind, is an undervalued key that is also an awesome book. No doubt about it. And if you have $230, you can cover your bases and be able to pick up a solid copy of this book at a 9.8. All right. So a little bit of a potentially controversial pick there, depending upon one's point of view. But I think it is a solid book. The next book that we're going to look at also is a solid book and probably a little less controversial. This is the Batman Adventures issue 12. This is the first appearance of Harley Quinn, arguably one of the most established modern characters for DC. This character has had repeated and sustained success in the comics and also on screen. Admittedly small screen, but the character is well established, well beloved, and has an awesome fan base. This is not a terrible book to pick up in any grade, but we are specifically going to look at the 7.5 because this meets our criteria of $400. So that's why we're going to look at the 7.5 here. There are 8,400 copies of this book out there, Universal Blue Label. The 7.5 represents about 89% of that number out there. There's 368 copies on the CGC census report. And again, just a really awesome book. But you can see here, the 90-day average for this book, $346. You can see that right there. 90 days, it was $450. A year ago, its average, $460. So it is at one of its lowest points in the last year. And again, you can see that play out here in the data. $397 was roughly the last average for this book. And if you just look across the line, just follow the line, flat line across, this book has been performing pretty much at that line of around $400 or so. I mean, it had some ebbs and some flows there, but generally a flat line, right? Not as pronounced as what we've seen with other books, especially during the pandemic. But if you back up here, when was this? This was June of 2020. This book was going for $335. And right now we're at $346, backing up just a little bit more low line here. January of 2019, $265. Again, that was an amazing price for this book. But the popularity in my mind of Harley Quinn is going to only increase with time, especially when Lady Gaga debuts as her in the upcoming Joker 2 movie, which I think is expected in October of 2024, if those dates still hold true, given everything that is happening in the pandemic. Again, just a solid book featuring a solid character that has maintained over years. To me, that is a huge thing. A fan base that is maintained over time, not necessarily a flash in the pan. The other thing I would say to you is that many of the books that we're looking at in this video, generally speaking, are solid books regardless of the grade. So if you have a budget that is more or less than what I'm talking about, for the purpose of this video, you can always adjust the grade to match what your budget might be if you believe in the rationale behind the book itself. And the Batman Adventures issue number 12, first appearance of Harley Quinn, is not a bad book to have in one's collection. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at another example. Again, not necessarily a controversial book. This is X-Men issue number 129, the first appearance of Kitty Pryde, who is I wouldn't say incredibly popular, but is a popular X-Men character. No doubt about that. It's also the first appearance of Emma Frost, solid villain slash anti-hero, depending upon how she's being written, but it's also the first appearance of Sebastian Shaw, first Hellfire Club, Dark Phoenix saga begins in this issue. The point here is that there is a lot going for this book. X-Men issue number 129, not a terrible book. But again, given our price point of $400, the 9.4 is not a terrible book for people to actually look at. And I want to zoom in here just a little bit. The most recent sale for this book was a little while ago. Well, not terrible. In June of 2023, it went for less than $400. Less than $400. And if you back up, the 90-day was $424. The 1-year average for this book was $473. And you can see the high water mark during that time was $700. In the last year, somebody bought this book for $700. The low for the same time period is $370. And like I said, the most recent price, $398. And again, if you follow this line, if you draw an imaginary line from where it finished to where I'm pointing to right now, which is February of 2021, it's a relatively flat line from that point to that point, shows that this book in February of 21 was going for $383. The high watermark, again, if we zoom in on this one, was in 2021, $1,183. $1,183 $3 is what this book was going for back during the pandemic. And if you look at the back end of this line, you can see again the $200 mark is where it was. The question is, will it ever go back to that? I don't know. I really don't know. With the anticipation of the X-Men potentially coming to the MCU at some point, I don't know if we're ever going to see a $200 X-Men issue number 129 again, but anything is possible. Anything is possible. But again, buying back here would have been a big mistake, but it would have been less pleasing than if you were to buy this book now. Again, a solid book to pick up. If you have about $400, you can always make the adjustment if you decide that you want to spend a little more or a little less. Just look for a different grade to match up with your budget. But again, a great book. 3 awesome books: X-Men Annual 14, Batman Adventures issue number 12, and X-Men issue number 129. With that, we're going to wrap this video up. I want to thank you all for taking the time to watch. I hope that you enjoyed it. If there's books that you may want me to check out and to evaluate, be certain to leave those comments down below. You can also send me a message on Instagram at Regie Collects. And lastly, if you have not yet followed the channel, I want to invite you to do so now. Go ahead and turn on notifications, and that way you won't miss out on any of the content that I release. Take care.
This thing on? Mic check. I just want to make sure y'all can hear me clearly. Yo, should you practice art, or should art be your practice? I had a question, so I asked it. Not to anyone specifically, but to my inner God, you know? The one that's gonna be a master, the one that's more than a rapper, the one that's an educator, the one that seeks enlightenment. He travels with concepts, he's got the mindset expansive. He understands that his time combined with travel and concepts makes his mind convex. Sort of like when you look at a brain scan, straight off meditation, we was concaving until we had that eternal dialogue that created our dialect. Now we in distinct rooms with pure souls having them conversations. Synergy and combinations, you fly and we waiting. Indian style in the gold.